Life for Sylvia was an unrelenting grind, but her determination to give her sons a better future never wavered. Her days began before dawn, and her nights ended long after most of the town had gone to sleep. The construction job she managed to secure was grueling. Each morning, Sylvia tied her hair back tightly, donned her worn-out gloves, and braced herself for the physical toll of the day ahead. The worksite buzzed with the sounds of machinery, shouting supervisors, and the clang of metal against metal. Sylvia, the only woman on the crew, quickly proved her worth. Her petite frame belied her resilience. She carried heavy bricks, mixed cement, and hauled tools without complaint, earning the respect of her skeptical co-workers over time. "You're tougher than you look," one of the older workers remarked one afternoon as Sylvia hoisted a wheelbarrow of gravel. She offered a faint smile, sweat dripping down her brow. "I've got 3 little reasons to be tough," she replied, thinking of her sons. At home, Grace's presence was a blessing. She helped care for the boys while Sylvia worked, singing them lullabies, feeding them warm meals, and teaching them rhymes and stories. Sylvia often returned home to the sound of giggling children and the sight of Grace knitting by the fireplace, a picture of calm amidst the chaos. Despite the physical and emotional exhaustion, Sylvia found joy in the little moments. The way Daniel's eyes lit up when he saw her at the door, how David clung to her legs with an exuberant hug, and Derek's curious babbling, all of it reminded her why she endured. But the struggles were far from over. Sylvia often battled doubt and fear. How could she provide for 3 boys on her meager income? What if something happened to her, leaving them vulnerable? These thoughts haunted her, especially on the nights when her body ached too much to sleep. One such evening, Sylvia sat at the kitchen table with Grace, her hands trembling as she rubbed her temples. "I don't know if I can keep this up," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Grace reached across the table and placed a weathered hand over Sylvia's. "You're doing more than just surviving, Sylvia. You're building a foundation. Your boys see it, even if they're too young to say it. One day, they'll thank you for every brick you've laid." The words resonated with Sylvia, and she held onto them in the days that followed. As the years passed, her boys grew into curious and intelligent children. They spent their days at school, where Sylvia insisted they focus on their studies. "Education is the one thing no one can ever take from you," she would tell them, her voice filled with conviction. At night, she helped them with their homework, her exhaustion taking a backseat to their needs. Though she lacked formal education herself, Sylvia was resourceful, often borrowing books from the library or asking Grace for help when needed. The boys, aware of their mother's sacrifices, worked hard to make her proud. Daniel excelled in mathematics, David showed a knack for debate, then Derek became the family's budding inventor, always tinkering with scraps he found around the house. Sylvia's bond with her sons grew stronger with each passing day. They were her pride and joy, the reason she pushed through every hardship. Grace often reminded her, "Sylvia, you're not just raising sons. You're raising men who will move mountains." And Grace was right. The boys began to dream big, inspired by their mother's relentless determination and unshakable love. Daniel often whispered to his brothers at night, "One day, we are going to take care of Mama. She's done enough for us." Sylvia's sacrifices began to bear fruit, not just in the achievements of her sons but in the quiet moments when she felt their love and gratitude. The foundation she had worked so hard to build was solid, and with each passing day, the walls of a brighter future grew taller. Months passed since Sylvia had arrived in the small town, and with each passing day, she grew stronger. Grace's home had become a sanctuary, a place of peace and kindness that Sylvia had never known before. The days blended together in a comforting rhythm, mornings spent with Grace, tending to the garden or cooking meals together, and afternoons filled with Sylvia working odd jobs to earn enough for her and her children. Each evening, Sylvia would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and Grace would join her, their conversations becoming as much a part of Sylvia's routine as the work itself. Grace was more than a kind old woman to Sylvia. She was a mentor, a mother figure, and, at times, a guide. Sylvia had never known a woman so full of wisdom and grace, and the more time she spent with her, the more she realized how much she had been missing in her own life. Grace's soft words, her patience, and her understanding seemed to make the burden of her situation lighter. They shared stories, laughter, and occasionally, tears. Sylvia found herself opening up in ways she hadn't done since she was a child, feeling safe in Grace's presence. One evening, after Sylvia had spent a long day working as a waitress at the local diner, she returned home exhausted. Her feet ached, and her back was sore, but she was determined to make it work for her children. When she entered the small living room, she found Grace sitting in her usual spot by the window, a book resting on her lap, though her eyes were focused on something far beyond the pages. "You look tired, dear," Grace said, her voice gentle as always. "Come sit with me." Sylvia dropped her bag on the floor and plopped down next to Grace, sighing deeply. "I'm so tired, Grace. It feels like I'm always chasing something, but never quite catching it." Grace chuckled softly and set her book aside. "You've been chasing the wrong thing, Sylvia. You're not running a race. You're building something, a life, a future for you and your boys. And building takes time." Sylvia looked at her, feeling the weight of those words. "I know. I just wish things were easier." "I've lived a long life, Sylvia," Grace began, her eyes distant as she recalled memories. "And I can tell you that nothing worthwhile ever comes easily. Life will always throw challenges your way, but you can't let those challenges define you. You choose how you respond." Sylvia was silent for a moment, letting Grace's words sink in. She thought of her father, of how he had treated her, of how everything had fallen apart when she was disowned. She thought of how hard she was working just to get by, to give her sons the life she never had. She thought of the loneliness she sometimes felt, the emptiness that weighed on her heart at night. But then she looked over at Grace, who had lived through so much, yet still had a light in her eyes. Sylvia realized that perhaps there was a way to move forward, not with bitterness or anger, but with strength and resilience. "You're right," Sylvia said softly, her voice full of quiet resolve. "I've been so focused on the struggle that I've forgotten why I'm doing this. For my children. For us." Grace nodded, a proud smile on her face. "That's the spirit. It's not easy, Sylvia, and it won't always feel fair. But you have to keep going. You're doing it not just for yourself, but for your children, too. They are watching you, learning from you. They are going to grow up knowing what it means to work hard, to be strong, to keep going even when the world seems to be against them." Tears pricked at the corners of Sylvia's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Grace had a way of making everything seem possible, even when it felt impossible. She had a way of reminding Sylvia that despite the pain and the hardships, she had value, and so did her children. They were her reason, her purpose, her strength. Over the next few weeks, Sylvia threw herself even harder into her work, not just to survive, but to honor the lessons Grace had imparted. The boys, now toddlers, grew healthier and stronger each day, and Sylvia marveled at their resilience. They were growing up to be kind-hearted, intelligent young boys, and she could see in them the promise of a brighter future. But it wasn't just the boys who were growing. Sylvia herself was changing, evolving into someone she never thought she could be. She was beginning to see her worth not just as a mother or a survivor, but as a woman capable of achieving her dreams. Grace, too, continued to teach Sylvia in subtle ways. She taught her how to make her small home feel like a sanctuary, how to fill it with warmth and love despite its humble size. She taught her how to cook meals that didn't just nourish the body, but the soul. One evening, as Sylvia and Grace sat at the kitchen table, Grace turned to Sylvia with a knowing look in her eyes. "You've learned a lot in these months, Sylvia. But there's one last lesson I want to share with you." Sylvia looked at her curiously, waiting. "You need to believe in yourself," Grace said, her voice quiet but firm. "I can teach you everything I know, but at the end of the day, it's you who has to believe that you're capable. Don't ever let anyone or anything convince you otherwise. The world will try to knock you down. But you're stronger than you think." Sylvia absorbed Grace's words, the weight of them sinking into her heart. The thought of taking that final step, of fully believing in her own power, scared her. But for the first time, she realized that perhaps she was ready. Maybe she could build a future for her children and herself, a future that was free from the shadows of her past. The next morning, Sylvia woke early and, for the first time in a long while, smiled at the reflection in the mirror. She wasn't the same person who had arrived in the town months ago, lost and broken. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned not just how to survive, but how to live. And as she prepared for another day of work, Sylvia knew, deep down, that the future she had once thought was impossible was finally within reach. The lessons from Grace had set her on the path. It was up to Sylvia to walk it with courage and belief in herself. She would walk it for her children, for herself, and for the future she knew she could create. Sylvia's triplets, Daniel, David, and Derek, grew up under her careful guidance, each one carrying an innate determination to succeed. From the moment they could talk, Sylvia instilled in them the value of education. She often sat with them late into the night, poring over homework, drawing shapes in the dust of their small table, and turning everyday tasks into learning opportunities. "We may not have much," Sylvia would say, her voice steady and encouraging, "but knowledge is something no one can take away from you. It's your ticket to a better life." The boys listened to her words as if they were gospel. Their humble home became a hub of curiosity. Grace's bookshelf, though modest, provided a treasure trove of stories and lessons. She had always encouraged reading, and the boys devoured every book they could get their hands on. From adventure tales to science textbooks, they were eager to learn about the world beyond their small town. At school, their teachers quickly noticed their exceptional drive and intelligence. Daniel excelled in mathematics, David shone in debates and writing, and Derek demonstrated a talent for science and engineering. The triplets were often seen huddled together in the school library, whispering excitedly over open books. Their peers admired them, but there were also challenges. Bullies occasionally mocked their hand-me-down clothes and patched shoes. Sylvia's sons, however, held their heads high, drawing strength from their mother's resilience. "Ignore them," Daniel would say to his brothers after a particularly rough day. "Mom works harder than anyone. We'll show them what we are made of." Sylvia took odd jobs to ensure her sons could focus on their studies. Whether cleaning houses, delivering packages, or laboring at construction sites, she never let her exhaustion show in front of the boys. Her sacrifice fueled their determination. When the triplets reached their final year of high school, the community began to rally around them. Neighbors offered tutoring help, old classmates donated textbooks, and teachers advocated for scholarships. Sylvia's unwavering commitment to her sons' futures inspired everyone around her, creating a ripple effect of generosity and support. At their graduation ceremony, Sylvia sat in the audience, her heart bursting with pride. All three boys graduated with top honors, earning full scholarships to prestigious universities. As they walked across the stage to receive their diplomas, they looked out into the crowd and found their mother. They raised their cups high, dedicating their success to her. The day the triplets left for university was bittersweet. Sylvia stood at the train station, her hands clasped tightly, fighting back tears. Daniel, David, and Derek each hugged her in turn, promising to stay in touch and return home often. "Don't forget where you came from," Sylvia said, her voice trembling with both pride and sadness. "And remember, no matter how far you go, this will always be home." As the train pulled away, Grace's absence weighed heavily on Sylvia. The elderly woman had passed away a few months earlier, leaving behind a void that was difficult to fill. Grace's words of wisdom still echoed in Sylvia's mind, pushing her to remain strong despite her loneliness. Life without the boys was quiet, almost too quiet. Sylvia continued to work, but the house felt empty without the sound of their laughter and the sight of their books strewn across the table. She poured herself into community activities, volunteering at the local library and mentoring young mothers who faced challenges similar to hers. Meanwhile, the triplets thrived at university. Daniel founded a startup that revolutionized logistics, David earned accolades as a top law student, and Derek conducted groundbreaking research in renewable energy. Each brother carried a piece of their mother's strength with them, channeling it into their respective fields. Despite their successes, the boys never forgot Sylvia's sacrifices. They called her every week, sharing stories of their accomplishments and seeking her advice. "We are doing this for you, Mom," Daniel said during one of their calls. "One day, we'll make sure you never have to work another hard day in your life." Sylvia's heart swelled with pride, but she remained humble. "Just promise me you'll stay kind and hardworking," she replied. "That's all I need." The loss of Grace had been a turning point for Sylvia. The elderly woman had become more than a landlord and friend, she was family. Her passing was peaceful, but it left Sylvia grappling with a deep sense of loss. Grace had left behind a letter for Sylvia, which she found tucked inside one of the old books on the shelf. With trembling hands, Sylvia unfolded the paper and began to read. "My dear Sylvia, if you're reading this, it means my time here has come to an end. Don't be sad for me, for I've lived a full life, and meeting you and your boys was one of its greatest joys. You have a strength that is rare in this world, and I know you'll continue to use it to build a better future for yourself and your sons. Never forget how far you've come and how much farther you can go. You have a light that shines brighter than any hardship. Take care of yourself, dear. And when the time comes, pass on the kindness you've received to someone else who needs it. That's the best way to honor me. With love, Grace." Tears streamed down Sylvia's face as she read the letter. Grace's words reminded her that she wasn't alone, even in her grief. She resolved to honor Grace's memory by continuing to live with the same kindness and determination that had brought her this far. From that day forward, Sylvia began sharing her story with others, becoming a source of inspiration in her community. She taught young mothers how to navigate hardships, shared practical advice, and reminded them that there was always hope. Grace's legacy lived on through Sylvia, who carried her light into the darkest corners of the world just as Grace had done for her. Find out what happened next in part 3 of this story, right on this channel. Meanwhile, did you enjoy the story? I hope so. Please like and share the video, drop your comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Thanks for watching and see you on the next.